Hi, this is Linus Sandgren, and you're listening to the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ilya, how's it going?
Happy New Year, Ben.
Happy New Year to you as well.
It is 2023.
Holy crap. It's been, it's 9 years since we started doing this.
That's about right, yeah. But, when we started the pandemic in 2020, if you told me that we'd be doing plenty of episodes and it would be business as usual in January 2023, I don't know if I would have believed you. And here we are.
Here we are. Well, I remember at the time having a moment where we were discussing, like, we would always have people before the pandemic. We would always have people come to your office. So we would never, we had done, I think, one remote interview ever before the pandemic started. And then when it started, you were like, well, are we going to send a microphone? Are we going to ship a rig for people? And I was like, screw that. Like, I'm listening to NPR and they're interviewing people over Zoom. Let's just interview people over Zoom. Make it very easy for them. And what happened was, I'm not saying I was right, but in this case,
you were right. Okay. You take the credit.
A stopped clock is right twice a day.
Yeah.
In this case, what it meant was it opened us up to the entire world. And we got to interview people like Frederick Wiseman, who I don't think he comes to LA very often. So
yeah, it was a good plan and it's worked out really well. And I'm glad that the whole world has gotten much better at this too.
Excellent. So let's get into our close focus.
No. Before we do that, who's on the show today?
Oh my God, how did I even forget? We have an amazing guest, and I believe this is his third time on the show, Linus Sandgren, who shot the amazing-looking movie Babylon, which I've now watched twice. I saw it on the big screen, and then I got an Academy screener and watched it again. Ooh. And I liked it even more the second time. I was really, it had been after I had interviewed Linus, so I was kind of looking for some of the stuff that he had talked about. But just what an amazing piece of craftsmanship. I'm kind of bummed that the movie doesn't seem to be like finding an audience, but maybe if it gets some Oscar recognition, it'll be one of those movies that does find an audience. It's so gorgeous to look at. The cast is so amazing. And there's a few sequences in it that I would say are in my top 5 of films about what it's like to make a movie, even though it's about old timey filmmaking, like it's about the move from silent to sound.
Do they all talk like this? They all talk like they're, in a movie when they first became talkies.
Yeah. Well, the scene I'm talking about, and I think this scene alone is worth watching the movie, it's the first scene that Margot Robbie's character does where she's recorded, where there's audio. And the audio tech is controlling the shoot and driving everyone crazy. And the camera makes so much sound that they put it in a box in like a giant wooden container, and the operator has to be inside that, and the lights already make the studio hot, so it's even hotter inside there. And basically it's like all the fun has been taken out of making movies. These people were like winging it and having a good time, and suddenly it's like Margot Robbie has to hit her mark, and the director is like freaking out, and the first AD has a meltdown in this scene that has been most certainly the internal monologue of every filmmaker I've had this internal monologue myself. And it's just a wonderfully constructed sequence, beautiful to look at. And the whole movie is just gorgeous as all hell. And Linus, we've had him on the show before. You don't often talk about range in terms of cinematographers because everyone is trying to, I don't know of a single cinematographer who's like, I only want to do comedy or whatever. But it's like in the last year, he did Don't Look Up, No Time to Die, and he did this. Those 3 movies are all masterfully executed and brilliant and wonderful. And also, none of them look the same. They're just so well done. So I would encourage anyone listening to the sound of my voice to check out Babylon. I want it to do better than it's doing.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm also looking forward to this interview. So I'm glad that you got to spend some time with Linus. I think I did his last 2 interviews. Ben, what are we talking about for Close Focus today?
Well, it was something that you brought up recently, and it was about sort of the evolution that we've gone through with video games and video game movies and the crossover. And, when you look back to, the 90s even, which, is 30 years ago now, video game movies based on video games, ran the gambit of being either just dismissed or like the original Super Mario Brothers movie, which was just crazy surrealist garbage. And that movie, if you haven't seen it, just go find the trailer for it. You'll be like, what does that have to do with Mario at all? I don't know what I'm looking at. It's nuts. Dennis Hopper is in it, plays a lizard or something. It's insane. And, like recently the trailer for the new Super Mario Brothers movie came out, and you watch that and you go, oh, why didn't they think of that back then? Like,
yes, famously, it's going to star Chris Pratt. And yeah, the world of entertainment, of video games and movies seems to be melding and merging in more than just one way, and more than that video games are becoming more realistic, or that people are looking to make another round of more interactive movies. I think really what's happening now is the movies are getting better based on video games.
Sure.
Just recently we had, Uncharted and Sonic the Hedgehog, which were both hits. But beyond that, I think it's that video games have gone from being sort of like a punchline or a minor diversion now to something that literally there's millions and millions of people spending many of their waking hours playing video games. And it's got, all of this culture that, trickles through various forms of social media, including its own social media in the form of like places like Twitch. So yeah. I am not going to pretend to be a video game expert, even though I might have been able to take that claim back in the early 80s when video games were much simpler and much fewer.
Kicking everybody's ass at Galaga? What?
Well, oh man.
Dig Dug?
I don't want to brag, but
Gorf.
I did take a picture of my high score, because now there's a new version of Galaga, which is like networked and the scores are all out there. And I think I came in like 135th, which I thought was pretty freaking good for like the country. So, I wasn't in the top 10, but anyway, regardless.
I didn't realize that I was in the presence of such greatness.
No, you're not. So I don't think it takes too much to become number 135 on Galaga. But
I'm not slagging Galaga, by the way. I've put hundreds of dollars in quarters into Galaga machines over the years. Love it.
That music is addictive, I'll tell you. Anyway, okay, but so here's the thing. The movies are getting better, and also it's interesting to see the movies that are getting video game treatments. And that's been going on forever. I remember, of course, famously, the E.T. video game. There was a whole documentary made about that, made by some of my clients, actually. Yeah.
A good friend of mine made that. She was the producer on it. Kat Pasiak, who was the producer on 20 Seconds to Live. She was one of the producers on that documentary.
Well, awesome. All I was going to say, though, is that the world is realizing that these video games are potentially multi-billion-dollar franchises, and people want to have more than just a video game interaction with the characters and the content. And I'm going to say, like, if you look at the animated Cyberpunk, which we've talked about on the show, the animated Cyberpunk series that was released on Netflix, that became one of the most popular series on Netflix this year, at least according to their own metrics, which they released. That became a huge, huge hit. And just looking at the future, like what's coming out, highly anticipated, there's no release dates and not a lot of details, but popular franchise video game called BioShock's becoming, getting a treatment for a movie right now. Same thing with another video game series called Borderlands.
The Last of Us is going to be a huge HBO series.
It's about to become a huge HBO series.
Written by Craig Mazin, who did Chernobyl. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, what was the problem? Obviously, I wasn't working in the business in the 90s, but like, what was the problem in the 90s where they wouldn't even try to take the stuff seriously? You'd get stuff like Street Fighter, which is like, okay, I can see that you take that game and turn it into a kung fu movie. That's pretty straightforward. But it wasn't that long ago that Dwayne Johnson was in the adaptation of Doom that completely flopped. And what were they missing? What were they missing, and what have they found?
I think that there's more budget behind it. I think that decisions have been clearly made that these deserve the time and resources. And I think that also there's a generation of people who grew up with video games who don't want to see that sort of treatment occur anymore, that like professionals who work in the industry. There's some real names attached to some of these projects too, like Neil Blomkamp. He's doing Gran Turismo, which was a popular driving game. Five Nights at Freddy's, that's getting sort of like a horror Jim Henson treatment and going to be coming to theaters sometime in the not too distant future. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of in the pipeline. And I think Hollywood says, hey, there's already an established fan base. People are going to be perhaps reminiscent because some of these games are not recent. These are older properties, but they had a certain amount of magic that captured imagination. And even all these years, decades later, having a movie come out with, they feel like there's a built-in audience that's going to want to reward it and want to see it and want to try to capture some magic. And let me tell you, it used to be that comic book movies were not real things. It really took a big change for the comic book to become a legitimate form of entertainment. And now it's video games. And I can't kind of wait to see what's going to happen next with this.
Well, me either. I'm actually really looking forward to The Last of Us. I listened to the Script Notes podcast, which Craig Mazin co-hosts, and so I've been hearing him talk about it for 3 years easily. And if what he did on Chernobyl is any indication of what he's done with this material, it's going to be some pretty amazing stuff. And I just appreciate that we're finding new, awesome ways to expand story worlds. That's what we're here to do, right?
Yeah, I think that it's exciting. And of course, Pedro Pascal is definitely, his career is on fire right now. And we've talked about him a bunch on the show, and he's headlining The Last of Us so for HBO Max, and I can't wait to see it.
Hopefully HBO Max won't shelve it before we get a chance. Anyway, on that note, let's get to our interview with Linus Sandgren.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
All right, so we are here today again with Linus Sandgren. Thank you for coming back. It's so exciting to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, your work just continues to blow my mind, like the stuff you do, and it's all so different. Like, I know that a lot of cinematographers are kind of chameleon-like in that they don't do the same exact looking thing all the time. But I went into Babylon. I saw a screening of it last week. I had seen one trailer of it months ago, hadn't really thought about it, and I had no idea what I was truly in for. This movie is insane.
Yeah.
The running time alone, it's like 3 hours and 9 minutes.
Yeah.
When I tell people that, they're like, that's excessive. And I'm like, well, the movie's called Babylon.
Yeah.
It's not called Moderation. So,
right.
And you'd worked with Damien Chazelle before, but tell me about how you were brought into this collaboration, because it's just an unbelievably huge undertaking and just gorgeous and lush. And oh my God.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, like you said, I worked with Damien on 2 other films. He sent me the script while I was shooting No Time to Die, actually. And I read it. And like you said, the script is actually quite overwhelming and very special and original. So I was right away into helping him do it. And once we started, it's a very long script with lots of fast moving pieces, and it's different, right? It's not a conventionally told story. It's very much Damien Chazelle original type of film where the story goes as he wished it to go. It's not necessarily following conventional rules, which to me is really refreshing working with him, because it's both sort of experimental but also confident, and hopefully perhaps better for the film to be told in his way. But it has a lot of, it's sort of a La La Land 2.0 in a way, or like maybe the other side of La La Land, the other coin.
I was thinking about that because La La Land owed a little bit, pays homage to Singing in the Rain. And then not only does this movie sort of track a similar storyline to Singing in the Rain in that it's about the end of silent movies, but it even has a scene, there's a scene where one of the characters goes and sees Singing in the Rain. So I kind of caught that through line, and I was wondering, I assumed it was intentional because it's...
Yeah. But I think it's really also more about, I think, Damien being a cineast, he loves movies. He just loves cinema, and that's what the film is about. It's about, despite the dark stories in this, you sort of want to leave with a feeling that cinema is important. And it's really interesting to work with Damien because he really does a huge dig into the subject he's about to tell. And he's done so much research, and every film is different, between La La Land and First Man. There was a dramatic change for me being used to, or having worked with Damien on La La Land, and then we went into sort of a docu-style filmmaking, which was so different from La La Land. It's just because Damien wants to tell the story in the most appropriate way for that story, right? It's like, that's how he thinks. And then you could see a pattern or a style that he has. But I think it's always important to go to the root of the script and the story and try to figure out how should we tell this story in the best way.
Watching this movie also, I was drawn to two semi-recent movies, those being Boogie Nights and The Aviator. And it really it feels a lot like Boogie Nights, right down to, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but there's a scene with Tobey Maguire that so mirrors a scene with Alfred Molina in Boogie Nights, and even kind of comes around that point in the movie and that weird point of desperation for the main characters. Was there any discussion of those movies, or were most of your references kind of older movies?
I think the references were, we watched films together, like we screened film prints of like Chinatown.
Oh, wow.
To see sort of the world of that era, and sort of that film is just brilliant. It was a beautiful print, actually. We saw other films like There Will Be Blood. We saw Boogie Nights as well. There's a lot of films about LA to see the time period more. But you're really right in that Boogie Nights I think the tone is similar. It's like you have a story that has a lot of filth and grit and darkness, but you leave with a sort of love for all these characters. It's like that is what you need to ground, right? It's like the love for those characters. They're so memorable because you feel a lot of empathy with them. And this, I think that similarity is there. I think it's like there's lots of darkness in here, but there's lots of love for characters.
And let's talk about that opening sequence. I mean, like the opening title card happens like 30 something minutes into the film. And I even like looked at my watch. I was like, oh my God, that was just so much to cram in. But it is a complicated sequence. It's a wild party. You have to establish the world. You know, I love it that it takes place in Bel Air, and it just looks like, empty nothingness. Like for those who aren't in LA, like Bel Air is like a hugely developed area, so it's like weird to see it. I mean, as an Angelino, I have another, level of appreciation, but talk about like the construction of that opening sequence. 'Cause it's kind of insane, and yet everything pays off. It starts at the very beginning of the movie with people trying to get an elephant up a hill, which is an amazing metaphor for the whole movie, an almost Werner Herzog-esque metaphor.
Oh, totally.
And talk about like the construction of that first 30 minutes, because in and of itself, that first 30 minutes is just almost a movie just all by itself.
Right. I mean, we established a hot Los Angeles. It's empty. There's newly planted palm trees, which is kind of also bizarre, right? Like in the middle of almost like a desert. But it's a scene also it's shot in many different locations, even though it looks like it's supposed to be one big kind of castle-like party house. And part of that is shot like out in the Lancaster, the exteriors, and then the interiors are shot in at Ace, the lobby of Ace Hotel, and then we have parts on stage. But there was a lot of variables. I mean, we did break it all down in detail. The idea, right, is that we establish a lot of characters in this party, and the party itself is just insane. But it was complicated actually because we fell in love with the lobby of Ace, that Ace Theater. And that is a really complicated location to shoot a lot of extras in if you want to do big camera moves.
It's like crammed with hundreds of extras, and I'm assuming the elephant was real.
Actually, the elephant was CG because it was puppeteered by puppeteers, and then CG because we're not allowed to use those exotic animals. It's CG.
Wow.
I don't think you're allowed to shoot with elephants in period, I think.
I mean, it's probably better for elephants, but kudos to your CG people, because I just assumed it was real.
Right? Yeah, and also not the tusks, but the
trunk?
The trunk, yeah. That was puppeteered.
Yeah, it looked like a physical effect, because it's like so up in that guy's face.
Yeah. Oftentimes with Damien too, he's got like these really ambitious plans already planned in his head for how he wants to like move like crazy in the party and up high. He wanted to get really high angle, but never cut the camera and like keep moving, right? So we tried to figure out in that location, because it's the natural thing to think would be, some sort of crane move there in combination with Steadicam, and it was just not possible to fit a crane in there. So we ended up actually doing that with a cable cam, which we mounted up high, because there's like 3 levels of floors there. and mounted the cable cam corner to corner so we could do the move from the beginning to coming down. And then we sort of tracked back between people. And all of that was obviously coordinated in order to see exactly which characters we needed to see. And everything had to be sort of synchronized with the blocking. And so they didn't smash into the camera. And then the camera pulls back, right? And then booms up and we see the whole party. And then it pushes back into the trumpet and all on like musical cues. So we spent a little time like rehearsing, and blocking that and shooting one shot one day. And then there's a whip pan, and the whip pan leads us to a Steadicam shot to do the rest of it the next day. But that whole sequence, it's kind of rich and quite ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, because it's complex and it's huge. There's tons of extras and things that also, would cause slowdowns, like hitting really precise marks, and also like just having lots of naked people around. Like, there's ways that you have to be careful about that stuff, and there's all these different considerations. And like I said, it feels like it's like a perfect clockwork, like it's just moving.
Right.
And I think that's what made me think of The Aviator. Is there's something kind of Scorsese-ish about it, but its construction is it's so complex, even just that first 30 minutes. And that's where the movie gets going. You just brought up something too that I hadn't really thought about, but that this movie has like all these big epic set pieces, but then we're like moving in on just like a close-up of somebody in the middle of it. And we're keeping it really intimate with these characters and getting into them in the middle of like just intense chaos. The whole movie's got these scenes where there's chaos in the background.
Yeah.
Was there like a specific approach you took to that where it's like, oh my, there's so much going on, but we only care about what Brad Pitt thinks about it,
No, totally. But I think it's a combination. I think it is a combination where we want to make sure that we always see everything. But in order to make a story emotional, you need to try to dig into the eyes of the characters and see what they're thinking or see what's going on in there. But if you only shoot tight shots on people, you may lose the sense of where you are or how it feels. And I think Damien pays a lot of attention to that too, he's a musical storyteller. He has a musicality to how he thinks about story. And he obviously also has music on his films before we shoot as well. But regardless of the music, I think he's thinking musically. Say, for example, when they exit the party, right? It's like, she's like a free bird out there on a stage and it's dawn. It's just so like, it's like we wanted just that to feel like as much as an amazing start for her career. Like she's just on stage, they're looking out into the world and it's this beautiful morning. It's like, and very romantic. And he comes out into her space trying to see her closer and walks up to her almost like she's a wild animal. That's just amazing to watch nearby. But we actually panned the camera around enough to, I think, you sense the environment, you feel like all of that, but we're still in close-ups on both her and him. And it really helps to be curious, like have the camera try to tell something. But in general, I think it always helps when the camera tells a story, like tries to tell you something instead of relying on editing only,
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about this, though, because I read about this online, and I don't know if it's true, and I don't know if you saw it, but supposedly Damien Chazelle and Damien Chazelle's family and Diego Calva rehearsed the whole film and filmed it on an iPhone. And did you see any of this footage?
Yeah.
Oh, really? So they filmed like the whole film with him in their backyard, supposedly.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Was that instructive? Did that...
I think for them, it was, but it wasn't like, it was more for, I think, the acting, like a normal actor's rehearsal. But they did shoot on an iPhone, yeah.
It just made me think a little bit about how, there's a story about how Coppola would do that with his actors. He would bring them into a stage, rehearse, block the whole movie, and then they would film it on video. Like this is in the 70s and 80s, and then they would cut that together, and that was always the first draft. And I was like, man, I would love to see Apocalypse Now.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Apocalypse Now on 3/4 inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. Well, it sounds like that was used more as an acting tool than a cinematography tool.
Yeah,
so.
no, totally.
So there's another sequence that I mentioned earlier that I think is one of the sequences that people are going to be talking about for a long time because it is about filmmaking, but it so captures the frustration of being on a set and not being able to capture it. And it is So for those who haven't seen it, it's the early days of sound recording, and Margot Robbie's character is doing her first sound scene, and they're in this big sound stage, and they have microphones placed in such a way that it takes like 30 minutes to move them if she wanted to miss her mark, and the director's going out of their mind, and the first AD, I don't know if they actually called them first ADs back then, is like slowly unraveling. He becomes the star of the scene because it's his job to just get the goddamn shot.
Yeah.
And
he's amazing. Yeah. And same with the sound man, I think. And Margot, there's like...
And the cameraman's in like a hot box because they're blimping the camera, and the only way they can do it is to have it in a giant box so it doesn't make sound.
Yeah, imagine. And how almost like the sound man was the star of the shoot back then because everyone was dependent on him, and he became almost like the director. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is obviously based on truth. It's like when Damien see these boxes, it's like, oh, it must have been so hot in there. It's like no ventilation, must have been super hot. It's all these hot lights and hot for everybody. And then you have these insane sort of rigs for the sound, and there's no sound booms. It was all on. They were tied up to the rafters. And I think you take that and then you exaggerate it a little bit. And there's a lot of fun details you can use for creating that comedy of like an insane shoot, trying to make that work. And then I agree. It's like exactly how I feel sometimes, right? It's just like a lot of that was so fun because it's like, it reminds us of how it is, how hard it could be to shoot a film, or how frustrating. Same with, I mean, the battle scene and the sunset, and you're screwed because the sun is going down. You can't, I mean, we got to finish, and the frustration or the stress for that, all of that breaks them down. But then the joy of screening the film and have film come and watch it could pay back for that. So I think, I mean, that's very much what the film is about, the contrast of that.
And in a way, I kept thinking about this while I was watching it. Like, this movie is trying to encapsulate so much of film history. And in a sense, as the cinematographer of that, you're sort of one of the historians kind of telling us the story of film. Did that inform, and this is such a heady out there question, but did that inform any of your selection of film stocks to shoot on, lenses to use, the cameras that you shot on? Were any of those details part of the film history you were telling?
Actually, in two ways, I think. I mean, one way was that the realism of how things looked back then had to be as accurate as possible. So when it comes to like camera equipment, which is obviously props, and lighting, which is also props, but also lighting, it had to be like real looking, and we wanted it to feel like authentic, all of that. So we used, real old film cameras, and we couldn't find that many working 20s arc lights. There's arc lights, but they're like later. So we had this gentleman at Warner who works with historical lights. He helped us rebuild. He had like housings from old, huge arc lights that were not working, but they were period correct. And he fitted them with HMIs, which is daylight, right? So we could use them in the movie. So the lights you see in the movie is usually HMIs inside of real arc light housings, both on the exteriors and on stage. So that part of it was real. But then we didn't want it to feel like a period movie, but like, I mean, also the language in the film is modern.
Yeah.
And the camera watching this, whatever goes on, is also more modern and sort of our time's camera. But in a way, I think I read a book about lighting in the silent era. And it's funny to see how these discussions between like producers and studios and what they want from the films versus what the cinematographers wanted, and the union issues and all these things. And it sort of all goes around in circles. And a lot of the film is also about that, right? It's sort of the rise and fall of characters. It's the beginning and the end of eras within the filmmaking. It's the beginning and the end it's the end of the silent movies and the beginning of the talkies. And ever since then, it's always been new inventions and new cameras and new lenses. And the same with those lenses, we modify them to be more bloomy as well. So we scratch the glass with some fine metallic powder that you especially can see in like scenes like with Lady Faye, when she's performing.
Oh God, yeah.
She's there with a white.
It's so gorgeous.
Like with her gloves.
It's so striking.
And the light sort of bounces back off from her hand into her face, but blooms out from the hand. It's like, whatever the lighting was in the scenes, I lit the room, and if you saw them go into darkness, we just let them go into darkness. It's like we didn't want to make it too perfected. You capture the emotional essence of the character as opposed to perfecting the image to the last sort of stroke. And I think that is sort of the mentality we had, that letting things be contrasty when it was contrasty and letting things be really bright when it was bright, and not sort of adjusting to normalize things. Yeah, I hope people get to see it in the cinemas, because it's really made for the cinemas and not for video.
Yeah, I find that,
That's what I wish.
I hope people see it in the theater as well. And I feel like I want to go see more movies in the theater because through the whole pandemic, we've gotten used to streaming everything at home. And there's that temptation to watch your phone or go in the kitchen and get some food and not whatever. And I feel like these movies like your movie or The Whale, you want to like turn off your phone and just focus on this one story for a few hours and kind of be transported the way that you have.
Yeah, no, I've been so happy watching movies in the theaters lately. It's really where it should be for having a good experience of it.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming back on the show. Congratulations.
Thanks.
I'm assuming we're going to be seeing your name on the nominated Oscar list here in a few months. Congratulations, and I hope lots of people come out and see the movie.
Thank you, Ben. That was awesome.
So that was Linus Sandgren. Thank you again for coming on the show, Linus. And again, please go out and watch Babylon. It is something that is definitely very appreciated on the big screen. It's
3 hours and 8 minutes. Yeah.
9 minutes. 3 hours and 9 minutes.
Okay, sorry. That includes the credits. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't include any credits.
What about like post-credit sequences? Are there like 2 or 3 of those?
Yeah, there's at the end. Margot Robbie is brought in to be one of the Avengers. It's a little weird.
Yeah.
And now, short ends.
So now we should move into our short ends, our pet obsessions of the week. Ilya, what is your pet obsession this week?
I just finished season 1 of Kindred on Hulu, which is, of course, an FX series based on the Octavia Butler book, originally published in 1979. And there's already been some feedback about this because it strays a bit from the book. It's not, it's definitely inspired by, and it covers the same sort of themes. And it's not hiding the fact that this is the source material for it, but it does go off in different directions. And I got to say that it's about time travel. It's about slavery. It's about, looking at not exactly the best moments in our nation's history.
Time travel and slavery. Are you sure you're not talking about Yule Log?
I'm sure I'm not talking about Yule Log, but I did watch Yule Log. It was great.
Right?
Yeah, it was great. So for anyone who didn't hear our discussion of Yule Log, go back to last week. But anyway, here's the thing. Kindred, to me, it feels like a really incredible jumping off point, in the same way that like Watchmen was a wonderful jumping off point that also dealt with the ugliness of our nation's history and science fiction. And it did it in such a fantastic way. Kindred really, I think that there's a bunch of people who love the book who are not going to get past the differences and the creative liberties that were taken, but it's a different media. It's a different medium. I fully believe that creative folk should utilize the best aspects of the medium that they're working with to tell their story. And I think that they do a really good job telling the story here in this serialized television format, and you should give it a chance. I think that the world that they are building, the world that they've put forth, has all the potential to be like another Handmaid's Tale. It has all the potential to be this thing that people come back to over and over again in a lot of different ways. And of course, the first season, they really keep you in the dark. They don't explain exactly what's happening. There's sort of this discovery process that the main character goes through to figure out what's going on with them. But the performances are great. The production is great. Everything about it feels like a very coherent world. And even though no one alive today was alive back in the mid to late 1800s, I think they do a really good job of capturing that world. And then also the juxtaposition of 2022 Los Angeles and how the ripples and effects of our collective traumas still carries through. They've crafted the story and that you're hanging on. It's like an edge of your seat type of thriller. And I want to go back for more. I want to go back and I want to see how these, and I can't say that I think I've ever seen any other movie about slavery that I really want to revisit, that I want to go back to, and I want to see this some more because, boy, I need to get some more of the effects of slavery, as visceral and terrible it is, as the representation of it is in this story. There's all these other elements at play, and I got to say that the horrors of slavery are on full display, and it is an interesting counterpoint to after just watching like Emancipation. And there's a lot of stuff at this time of year actually that all is sort of the collective traumas of this country. But I would say give Kindred a try. I think that there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily want to go down a slavery bent sort of thing, and I think you should. This is not like taking your medicine. This is good entertainment. The characters are wonderful. And it's television being crafted at a very high level. It's totally worth your time.
I haven't seen it yet, and based on that endorsement, I'm definitely going to check it out. I've been hearing about it for a while. So
I was saving this moment for the end of it here too, because of course the showrunner is Brandon Jacob Jenkins, who is also known for being a producer of Watchmen and Outer Range, which I know you liked both of those very much.
Yeah.
So
true.
So yeah, definitely I would say give it a shot. I think you might really enjoy it.
Excellent.
So Ben, what is your short end this week?
So mine is a weird YouTube rabbit hole I fell down. And so in 1991, before I went to film school, Siskel and Ebert hosted a show that they used to do every year called If We Picked the Winners. And because I was going into film school the next year and I was hanging out with all the people at film school, I got invited to go to this screening. And I don't know why it popped up in my YouTube, but I'm like, I wonder if you can see me in any of the audience shots. I wonder if I could see myself. And so I hit play, and first audience shot, I'm like, there I am. I got a mullet. I'm wearing a black jacket. It's totally me. But because I watched it, YouTube just started serving me up Siskel and Ebert shows from all ages of Siskel and Ebert. And let me tell you, it is so crazy to go down a Siskel and Ebert rabbit hole. For those of you who are of a certain age, too young to remember this, every week since the 1970s, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert would do a show. It had a few different titles over the years. It was originally Sneak Previews, and I think at the last one it was At the Movies. And it was the two of them often arguing, like often kind of mean in their arguments with each other. Like they'd put each other down or talk about what shitty taste the other one had all the time. And so like over the holiday, while I was in Dayton, Ohio, a few days longer than I thought I would be there for, YouTube just kept like offering this up to me, and I just kept watching more and more of them. And it's interesting to go back because Gene Siskel died in 1999 and Roger Ebert, I want to say, died in like
2013.
Yeah, I was going to say 2013. And he still did his show for a while, and then he had some kind of cancer that ended up having him remove his lower jawbone. And so he kept reviewing movies, but he wasn't on television anymore. But he kept doing the show, and he did it with Richard Roeper. And Richard Roeper's a great critic. But it actually made me, and is continuing to make me kind of reassess sort of the place of film criticism in our culture, because we had on the show, we had Leonard Maltin, who's, one of the greatest film critics of all time. We had him on our show. And I feel like the art and craft of film criticism has kind of fallen off a bit. And people,
if you have a podcast, you can be a film critic, right?
Well, in part it's because of the democratization. So there's so many people on whatever the current video channel is, be it TikTok or Twitch or YouTube. Obviously, there's tons of YouTube channels where people are tearing movies apart. And in some cases doing it quite scholarly. But, we didn't have that many film critics. Also, like most of the film critics you'll talk about from that period of time are white dudes. You might get your Elvis Mitchell in there here and there, but it's mostly white dudes. And they're coming from a very white dude point of view. And sometimes you'll hear Siskel or Ebert say something that's a little cringe where you're like, do you need to talk that long about Bo Derek being naked? Or whatever. But it's an interesting experiment to kind of go back down that rabbit hole to be like, okay, this is them talking about who were up for the Oscars in 1990. Did they prefer Goodfellas to Dances with Wolves or whatever? Yeah. And a lot of the movies they're talking about too, like if you go through it and watch I obviously haven't watched all of them, but if you just watch a regular old episode of Siskel and Ebert from, the mid 90s or something, or late 80s, you'll see movies that you're like, oh, The French Lieutenant's Woman, forgot it existed. And also lots of movies that you just that I couldn't name off the top of my head just because they were like movies that were like pushed through the theaters and it's like they never were again. It's interesting to see their biases. I always complain about kind of a bias against horror movies. It's very much, if a horror movie comes out, they often trash it. Although I was very flattered to see that they did like the Blair Witch Project. Siskel was no longer with us, but on that show they liked the Blair Witch Project, but they trashed the original Evil Dead, the Sam Raimi Evil Dead. Mm-hmm. But it's something anyone can do with an internet connection. Just get on YouTube and look up Siskel and Ebert. If you are too young to have been a regular viewer like I was, you could still find them. And it's just kind of interesting to hear kind of two newspaper guys go at it, often acrimoniously, about what each one of them thought of what movie. So check it out.
I think it's a wonderful short end. And I remember watching Siskel and Ebert because if you were a movie fan growing up in the 80s, you didn't have a lot of outlets in like middle America and stuff. But Siskel and Ebert, or At the Movies, their show was syndicated and it was everywhere. And you could get a little sort of slice of film criticism every week when the new movies came out, which was a lot of fun.
No, it was great. And it's interesting because you watch it for the movie reviews, but also you watch it for their personalities.
That's
and
true.
They're kind of unlikely guys. They're not horrible on camera, but you wouldn't cast them out of central casting to be like, hey, let's have guys who look appealing on camera. And, today, if you were doing a show like that, you definitely wouldn't have two middle-aged white guys who, kind of had identical backgrounds. One wrote for the Chicago Tribune, the other one wrote for the Chicago Sun-Times. They're not even from different cities.
No, but I think that's also why the show happened. I think the show was produced in Chicago. And I got to say that their contention was part of the reason people tuned in, I think, and the fact that they had different tastes and that quite often they would split votes on things, and that contention, and there sometimes were insults, like they were openly hostile to each other on occasion. And there wasn't a lot of like stuff kind of like that where you had two people civil, but like, basically insulting each other's taste right across from each other.
It was like watching a married couple that had lost all of its love. And you can
they still had a little bit of love. They made it through the show. No one like got up and walked out. There was no like,
nobody did. But I remember once, I think that they were on Letterman or something, and whoever the talk show host was like, so you guys friends in real life? And they both were like, no, not at all. No, not in the least.
I've heard that they played that up though too. I don't
really?
know. I've heard that they both disliked each other and they liked each other. So I don't know exactly. They clearly were, they understood they were a package deal. They couldn't just like go off and have the same magic if they didn't have their counterpoint. So.
No, absolutely. But anyway, totally a total YouTube rabbit hole worth going down. So Ilya, where can people find you on the internet if they would like to do so?
If they want to track me down, they can track me down at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. We just got done getting a wonderful testimonial from someone on a studio that we built for them. So that was a lot of fun. Hopefully I'll have that put together here shortly and out into the world, and more studios all the time. So that is one really nice thing about the creator economy, and more people getting serious about their YouTubes and their socials, is that they're discovering that sometimes a studio space in their own house isn't practical, and they might need to go to a studio outside of their house in order to get done whatever they want to get done. And places like YouTube have built some incredible spaces, but if you aren't near a YouTube stage and you need to have access to that sort of space and size, there is now a growing number of people out there building studios, and Hot Rod Cameras has been helping people do it, which is wonderful. So Ben, where can people find you?
You can find me at benrock.com. You can find all my social media connections. A couple of people have hit me up on Twitter recently with follow-ups to our short ends and stuff like that. I'm at Neptune Salad on Twitter, and also on Mastodon, which I may be slowly transitioning towards as Twitter is mismanaged into the ground. Yeah. So Ilya, who should we thank for all of the festivities that are to come?
Oh man, let's thank our trio of heroes. We got to thank Ben Katz, who edits the show and makes us not sound like idiots. We got to thank Kays Al-Atrakchi, music by Kays.com. Kays is creating incredible music and doing all kinds of just fascinating stuff, including going down the rabbit hole of AI art. I've been enjoying seeing some of the stuff he's been doing. Reach out to Kays, hit him up. Say, hey, I heard the guys on the podcast talk about you and your music, and just saying hello.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah, that's
Nothing-
it. Just
nothing
do
fancy.
that. Yeah, it'll be fun. And then, of course, lastly, never leastly, Alana Cody, who has also been watching Kindred and also gave it a 2 thumbs up and a tribute to Siskel and Ebert there. So yes, Alana Cody, of course, producer extraordinaire. She is getting tons of new interviews lined up for us because, of course, it's Sundance in a couple of weeks. And so that's about to happen. So we've got a whole new crop of movies and things that we're going to be seeing here shortly.
And also, we're still up to our eyeballs in Oscar season stuff.
That's right.
We have this week alone, we have 2 major Oscar contenders that we're supposed to be talking to.
Yes, January is a busy month. January, we got a lot of stuff happening. So Ben, I think that just about does it for us. Take us out.
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.